After years of talking about it, the government is trying to take over the Teamsters union. There are 1.7 million Teamsters. When the government filed a civil suit in New York today seeking to get control of the union, it said that union members have been deprived of their rights because of the link between the union's leadership and organized crime. The U.S. attorney said, "We want control taken back from the mafia." Our first report is from ABC's John McKenzie.
Pulling together court cases from across the country, the government today detailed just how the mafia had taken control of the Teamsters union.
Through a pattern of racketeering that includes 20 murders, including at least 14 murders of dissidents, a number of shootings, bombings, beatings, a campaign of fear, bribes, extortion and theft, and misuse of union funds.
The government today charged that 26 alleged major mafia figures engaged in a conspiracy to control the union with 18 Teamsters officials, including President Jackie Presser. And the government went even further in its attempt to clean up the Teamsters. It's asking a federal judge to remove from office any union officer convicted of federal racketeering charges, and to appoint a trustee to discipline union locals, and to oversee free and fair elections to the Teamsters governing board.
We are not seeking overall control of the Teamsters union. This is a use of the racketeering statute in a surgical way to attempt to take back from the mafia the Teamsters union.
The Teamsters executive meeting in Montreal denied the union was controlled by organized crime and charged this suit was an attempt to destroy the union.
History will record that the complaint against the International Brothers of Teamsters marks the lowest point to which the Republican administration has yet fallen in the attack on working men and women of America.
The AFL-CIO deplored the action, and some members on Congress complained the government should not be going after a whole union for the actions of a few locals.
I think it's the wrong thing. It's the wrong precedent. It's the wrong thing for government to do. It's the type of thing you expect in Russia.
It is in fact designed to give the members of the Teamsters what they deserve, and that is a union that represents them rather than organized crime.
Government officials say the Teamsters should be in trusteeship only for as long as it takes to reform the union and rid it of mafia influence. That, however, could take years. John McKenzie, ABC News, New York.
The government's battle with the Teamster bosses has been going on and off for decades. Even so, today's action against them is the most dramatic move since the McClellan Committee hearings put Jimmy Hoffa on the spot back in the 1950s. ABC's James Walker has a background report.
The federal government's first major investigation of the Teamsters was in 1957.
Did you say that SOB, I'll break his back?
Who?
You.
Say to who?
To anyone. Did you make that statement after these people testified before the committee? Well, whose back were you going to break, Mr. Hoffa?
They give your speech. I don't even know who I was talking about, and I don't know what you're talking about. Ever since those hearings, the government has been trying to learn if a tie in fact exists between organized crime and the Teamsters Union, the largest union in the non-communist world, which has traditionally been made up of the nation's truck drivers.
A union like the Teamsters enables the mafia, which is primarily but not completely based in New York, to exert an influence nationwide on the transportation and the provision of goods that end up, for example, on supermarket shelves in different parts of the country.
In fact, Harmon suggested to the Justice Department in 1986 that the federal government should take control of the union. That same year, the feds did take over New Jersey Teamsters Local 560. For 26 years, 560 had been controlled by Anthony Provenzano, a reputed member of the Vito Genovese crime family, and his two brothers, Salvatore and Nunzio. All three have served federal prison sentences for crimes committed while they ran the local.
Local 560 had more to do with Murder Incorporated than it had to do with honest unionism.
Corruption and violence has pervaded the union for decades. In 1957, Dave Beck was jailed for tax evasion. Jimmy Hoffa, jailed in 1967 for jury tampering, pardoned in 1971. He disappeared in 1975 and is presumed the victim of a gangland murder. Frank Fitzsimmons, named in 1978 in a lawsuit charging massive mismanagement of a pension fund. Roy Williams, now in jail after a 1982 conviction for trying to bribe a U.S. senator. And in 1986, Teamsters President Jackie Presser and two associates were charged with embezzling more than $700,000 from this Teamsters local in Cleveland. In the past, Teamsters officials vigorously denied ties to organized crime, except in 1985 when former union President Roy Williams openly acknowledged mafia influence.
They were here a long time before I got here. and they keep getting stronger all the time.
So strong, in fact, the U.S. government finally decided today that the only way to try to stop the apparent corruption was to take control of the union. James Walker, ABC News, New York.
Forcing employers to use BAFA's labor leasing services. In exchange, Teamsters employees were fired, lost benefits, and Teamsters officials received payoffs to comply with BAFA's demands to join its labor leasing scheme. In addition, the government's papers allege that there have been numerous crimes committed by the Teamsters leadership. The government's court papers note embezzlement and bribery schemes that go to the highest levels of the Teamsters, including Roy Williams, who was the International Union's president until 1983. Williams was convicted, along with defendant Joseph Lombardo, alleged in the government's papers to be a high-ranking Chicago La Cosa Nostra figure, Alan Dorfman, and others, of conspiring to bribe then U.S. Senator Howard Cannon in an attempt to stop proposed trucking deregulation legislation. The bribe, which consisted of an offer of realty owned by the Teamsters Central States Pension Fund, was made to influence Senator Cannon's actions regarding the legislation. In exchange for the bribe, Senator Cannon, as chairman of the Senate Commerce Committee, was to contest the jurisdiction of another Senate committee over the bill in order to slow its progress. The complaint alleges that a current International Union Vice President, Don, have also been convicted of Teamsters-related crimes, including a current International Union Vice President, Maurice Scher, who is a defendant in this case. In 1984, Maurice Scher was convicted of receiving an illegal labor payment from a Teamsters employer. The complaint alleges that at the highest levels of the Teamsters, there has been threats of violence and intimidation. Roy Williams, the former Teamsters president, has testified in sworn testimony that was submitted to the court in connection with the government's papers here, that he was controlled by Nicholas Sabella. Other Teamsters officials were aware of this relationship with Sabella. There are 25 persons identified in the government's complaint as organized crime members and associates. Cosa Nostra members and associates from any participation in the affairs of the Teamsters during the pendency of this action. Second, an injunction barring Teamsters officials from engaging in any racketeering activity during the pendency of the action, from associating with any La Cosa Nostra members or associates, and from interfering in any way with any other provision of the judge's order. And finally, as a matter of preliminary relief, the government asks Judge Edelstein to appoint a court liaison officer whose primary responsibility will be to discipline Teamsters corruption during the pendency of the action, to exercise those powers currently vested under the Teamsters Constitution and the General Executive Board to discipline corruption of subordinate Teamsters entities and officials. In addition, the court liaison officer, the governor will request, should have the power to review proposed expenditures and appointments by the Teamsters General Executive Board. As a matter of permanent relief, after a trial on the merits in this case, the government requests permanent injunctions barring La Cosa Nostra members and associates from any contact with the Teamsters. Injunctions barring any Teamsters officials found to be racketeers from staying in the union. And appointment of a trustee whose primary responsibility will be to run free and fair elections for the Teamsters of new officers.
I'd like to ask Bill Dorn from the FBI to make a statement.
I think the important thing to remember is that this is not a case of union busting, but instead a case of mob busting. The FBI's investigative experience over the years has shown that almost every member of the LCN strives to involve himself or in some way attain some control over the labor movement. This gives him a sense of legitimacy and power beyond his association with La Cosa Nostra. The history of organized crime documents extremely well the control of various labor unions. And unfortunately, the lore of organized crime conjures up a thought of victimless crimes in support of illegal activities or criminal enterprises. However, nothing has more impact on the citizens of this country than the domination and control of the free labor movement and, to some extent, the related industries, causing an impact on the free enterprise system itself by La Cosa Nostra. Over the years, numerous FBI investigations have resulted in prosecutions of organized crime members who have used this union for their personal gain. However, while these prosecutions have been important, they have not been able to stem the control of the union by organized crime. The number one priority of the FBI's organized crime program is to eliminate the organized crime La Cosa Nostra influence from the free labor movement, therefore strengthening the free labor movement and not weakening it as some may think. This has been an all-out effort by FBI offices and other investigative agencies, not only in New York, but throughout the country, with the common purpose of liberating the Teamsters Union from organized crime control.
Mr. Giuliani, we have heard many indictments before that involve the Teamsters and other related leaders. Bottom line here, are you asking that the U.S. government, whether it be through a trustee or through this court-appointed liaison officer, in essence, take over this union, supervise its running? I think you say the officer should be day-to-day, but in essence, run this union now? Isn't that a first in some ways? A whole union.
The action here is really the eight prior actions in which the United States government has used the civil racketeering provisions, either with regard to unions, businesses, or areas of business, to attempt to take away from the mafia or organized crime assets that they have been able to gain sometimes over decades. One of those assets that the mafia has been able to obtain over the decades is a substantial amount of control over the Teamsters Union. And what we're seeking to do, using the racketeering statute, which for many purposes, for many reasons, was passed to do precisely this, is to take back from the mafia the Teamsters Union, to remove the control that the mafia has clearly exercised over the Teamsters Union over the years. And we don't base that on indictments. We base it on 340 convictions. And we base it on the fact that of the 26 mafia members and associates named in this indictment, 25 of them have been convicted, not indicted for, convicted of Teamster-related corruption, bribery, illegal payments, extortion, and murder. And we base it on 20 murders, 14 of which involve people who were seeking to change the Teamsters Union and trying to make it a union that would not be influenced as much as it has been in the past by the mafia. We are not seeking overall control of the Teamsters Union. This is a use of the racketeering statute in a surgical way to attempt to take back from the mafia the Teamsters Union. And it has been 2 to 3 years in preparation. It is a very, very massive and large lawsuit, and it contains a tremendous amount of material because it relies on a history of convictions that go back many, many years, but are as recent as last month.
Mr. Giuliani, under your proposal, who would actually negotiate contracts for Teamster members?
Well, it isn't a proposal. This is a lawsuit, and we seek to prove that the mafia controls the Teamsters Union. And as a result of that proof, we will ask the court for a permanent injunction. With regard to collective bargaining, with regard to those decisions would be made by the Teamsters Union. With regard to discipline, with regard to elections, with regard to the areas in which we allege that we can prove, and that the overwhelming number of convictions that have occurred already prove, we're going to ask that a trustee be appointed to oversee those operations. That's why I call it a surgical strike. The areas where the Teamsters Union has been able to operate without illegal activity, convictions for illegal activity, those are areas in which the trustee and the court liaison officer on a preliminary basis would not be involved. But in those areas in which there have been conviction after conviction after conviction of mafia members and Teamster officials for crimes, in those areas, we would be remiss in our obligations if we didn't bring the civil racketeering statute.
And we are talking about a partial takeover of the union by the government.
Well, we are talking about the trustee being in charge of certain aspects and some very major aspects of the running of the Teamsters union, because the convictions over the years have demonstrated that those are areas in which the mafia exerts substantial influence over the Teamsters union.
But that means that the current leadership would be able to negotiate new contracts and to negotiate with the truckers and the trucking companies.
The current leadership will remain in place until we have a trial and we prove what we have alleged in the complaint, which is that they have been engaged in racketeering acts, that they have sat by and permitted and watched the organized crime exert influence over the Teamsters union. And I think, as we point out in the complaint and in the other documents, there is no member of that board, including the most junior member, that hasn't sat there and watched conviction after conviction after conviction of mafia members and Teamster officials for organized crime and racketeering activity. The most junior member of the board has been there through 50 convictions. The most senior members through over 300 convictions. And they have done virtually nothing to take their unions back from the mafia. Some of them have announced that they are powerless to do so. And as a result of that, the civil racketeering statute, passed by Congress many years ago, almost precisely for this purpose, is an appropriate remedy to try to take this asset away from organized crime.
So employment supply have refused to clean up or have been unable to clean up the union, so you're going to essentially move forward?
Yes, that refuse to clean up the union would be probably the most euphemistic way to put it.
Mr. Giuliani, this matter of preliminary relief, though, you are asking a court liaison officer to discipline Teamsters corruption. What I'm just trying to get at is, could a judge just say, all right, till we hear the whole case, I'm going to appoint so-and-so to, in essence, run this union, in essence, oversee this union?
Our memorandum, this is an unusual case in two respects. I think we should bear it in mind as we answer the question. First of all, this is a civil case, not a criminal case. And secondly, this is a case that is based on hundreds of convictions already, which have legal effect. Convictions of mafia members and convictions of Teamster officials for crimes that implicate their responsibilities as members of the Teamsters union. So this is not the normal case in the sense that we're alleging something for the first time, and there isn't a foundation on which those allegations are based. As a result of what we have put forward in the memorandum and are prepared to prove with regard to these hundreds of convictions and cases as recent as last month and last year, we will ask the judge to take immediate action and have a court liaison officer take over those areas that are blatantly being disregarded by the board, namely the discipline of the various locals and the various acts that they could take in order to move their union away from the mafia. That has to be done immediately. As to the rest, we will go to trial, we will prove every single thing that we've alleged, and then we will ask the judge to remove all of those board members that we have proven to be involved in racketeering, and we will ask that for a period of time a trustee be appointed to reestablish this union and make it what it was supposed to be in the first place. A fair, a decent, and a democratic union, not an instrumentality of the mafia.
Before you go to trial, what do you see as practical effects of what you're doing? How will union members, for example, perceive the actions you're taking?
Well, first of all, most union members will not be affected in their day-to-day activities. It will not have an effect on their day-to-day activities. Remember, the allegations are that a large segment of the Teamsters union is controlled by organized crime, but not the entire Teamsters union. The President's Commission on Organized Crime estimated that 39 locals, at least, were dominated by organized crime. They then went on to note that those locals happen to be in the largest and most populous areas of America, and therefore make up a majority of the 1.6 million members. But that still leaves a large segment of people who are unaffected by it. And what we're seeking to do is to accomplish our result, which is in the best interest of trade unionism and in the best interest of the American people, which is to rid the Teamsters of mafia influence and do it without having an effect on the lawful and legitimate rights and obligations of the people who are union members and union officers.
Giuliani, would you have to scale back what your actions and the remedies you asked for because of not getting a conviction on the union election?
The Salerno case had something very helpful to us and something that isn't helpful. There were convictions of mafia figures, mafia members, mafia boss in one case, of illegal activity with regard to 2 Teamsters locals. That obviously is very helpful to us because it has an effect on the case and it is an established fact, not just an allegation. With regard to the election counts in the case, from our point of view, this is a civil case. We have a lesser burden of proof. We have additional evidence that we can present that was not presented in a criminal case, which was a very broad criminal case involving a lot of different things. And we think that with the lesser burden of proof and with the additional evidence that we'll be able to present, we will more than adequately meet the standard of proving by a preponderance of the evidence that, in fact, the last 2 elections, at least the last 2 elections for Teamster president was rigged by organized crime. Indeed, we have tape recordings that say that in both instances.
Will this lawsuit be possible before the commission?
And I should tell you that we have not substantially cut back anything that we plan to do before that.
Would this lawsuit be possible without the commission case?
Would this lawsuit have been possible without the commission case? This lawsuit would have been possible probably without any one of the cases that we rely on, of which there are many, but it would have been more difficult without the commission case. The commission case and the Genovese family case, both of them, establish beyond any doubt, because of jury verdicts, the existence of the commission, the way in which the commission operates and organizes itself, the way it exercises not only local but national power. And if there hadn't been a commission case, there would be 100 people that would respond to this today by saying there is no such thing as organized crime, there is no such thing as a mafia, there is no such thing as a commission, there is no such thing at all as mafia influence on the Teamsters. That's what they used to say 4 and 5 years ago. Now they're going to have to say something like, oh, this is terrible, it's going to ruin trade unionism, this is unfair, these are all old charges. Let me give you quickly the answers to those. The 25 convictions of the mafia figures in this indictment are all within the last 8 years. Several of them just a month ago. So these are not old charges. And this is in no sense an attack on trade unionism in any sense of the word. It is, we have limited ourselves, the relief that we ask for, to the things that we can establish based on convictions, numerous convictions. The commission case and the Genovese case maybe being the most prominent, but many, many convictions in the Eastern District of New York, in New Jersey, in Delaware, in Chicago, in Kansas City, all over the country. Numerous. There are 8 cases in which we brought civil RICO actions of this type. There are 3 in which trustees have already been appointed to run various aspects of unions. That it is true that in those cases we were talking primarily about locals, a combination of locals, but the concept is already established. So this may be the broadest application of it, but I could not say that we're setting a precedent.
Can you just briefly tick off again what actions Judge Edelstein did today?
Judge Edelstein entered a temporary restraining order enjoining 25 persons identified in the government's complaint as La Cosa Nostra members and associates who have previously been convicted of Teamsters-related crimes from having any participation in the affairs of the Teamsters. He also enjoined the current general executive board members of the Teamsters from making any extraordinary expense of union funds and from destroying any union records.
Now, you're asking for preliminary, part of the preliminary was this court-appointed liaison, which would ultimately lead to a trustee at some point. How long do you anticipate it's going to take for Judge Edelstein or whomever the judge is to grant that preliminary relief, which obviously you're looking for before you go to trial? Secondly, why is this case being filed in New York and not somewhere else in the country?
2 very good questions. The first is that if you look at all of the other cases that we've done here in this district, civil racketeering cases and the civil racketeering cases done in Brooklyn and New Jersey and elsewhere, we this is the pattern that we follow, and it makes a lot of sense. To first obtain, as a preliminary matter, those things that you need on an emergency basis, which we can establish from already proven facts. We don't have to go out and try these cases all over again. We can demonstrate all of the convictions and what they were for. And therefore, we have a court liaison officer in place to make certain that proper disciplining is taking place during the period of time that it takes to litigate this case. And insofar as a prediction...
Did I just understand you to say that the court liaison officer has been appointed?
No. Will be appointed. We're going to seek his appointment.
All right. What I'm asking, how long, when do you...
I don't know. I cannot tell you the precise timing. The judge has set it down and set the first hearing down for next Tuesday, which indicates that we're moving on a very, very expedited schedule. We will certainly do everything that we can to expedite all of this. We have had many years to prepare this case, so we are in pretty good shape to go forward with it as soon as it realistically can go forward.
Do you have a candidate for that position?
We do not have a candidate.
How do you ensure that the same thing won't happen again, future infiltration of the mob?
Well, let's get to the step of getting them out of the union first before we worry about how they're going to get back into the union. At this point, our effort is to remove mob domination to the extent that it exists within the Teamsters union. And I really don't think an educated, well-informed adult in America really doubts that there's mob influence within the Teamsters union. You have to have been on Mars for the last 10, 15 years not to realize that. If you look at the 340 convictions, the 25 organized crime figures convicted, the language of the courts of appeals throughout the United States, the President's Commission on Organized Crime, we go on and on. The reason for having a trustee in place after the trial on the merits, assuming that we're able to prove all this, and assuming we're able to get a trustee appointed, is to accomplish precisely that. Not only to remove the mafia from the Teamsters union, but to make certain that they don't come back into control the day after the lawsuit is over. That's really the limitation of the criminal case. You can bring a criminal case, you can put Fazzoni Salerno in prison for 100 years, or you can put Provenzano in prison, or you can put Corallo in prison, all of whom were either officers of or involved in Teamsters corruption. But you can't assure that the person below him or the person below him doesn't take over the union. If you have a trustee in place, you can have a lot more assurance that that doesn't happen. It's really the use of the racketeering statute in very, very similar way to the way the civil rights statutes we used in the 60s and 70s after discrimination was proven to try to make certain that it doesn't occur again, or the way the antitrust statutes we used in an earlier era.
Why is this being filed in earlier? Why is this case being filed in New York?
Well, the case is being filed in New York because a great deal of the activity that's alleged in the complaint occurred in New York. The commission of the mafia, of La Cosa Nostra, was largely located in New York. It was through the commission associations and discussions and meetings and action that a lot of the corruption was able to take place. And some of the primary convictions on which we base our case have taken place in the New York metropolitan area, Southern District of New York, Eastern District of New York, Local 560 in New Jersey. It is true that the corruption also has taken place elsewhere, Chicago, Kansas City, and other places, Cleveland. But if you were to add up all of the convictions, if you were to add up all of the contacts, it would seem that New York probably has the most. But it's not alone by any means.
There was discussion earlier that the federal government had taken over the union. You appear to have stopped one step short of that. Could you explain why?
No, there was never a discussion. I mean, that was always loose talk and not a very precise understanding of the racketeering statute and how it operates. The government has never intended to take over the Teamsters union. If you look at our other civil cases, we have never taken over a union. What we do is ask the court to assert control through a court liaison officer, a trustee, a receiver, of those aspects of a business or a union that we have proven to be corrupt and proven to be part of a racketeering enterprise.
But in Local 560, they've gone further than you're proposing here, where the trustee, Mr. Spear, is actually running the union. He was really for election.
Well, we've done that where we're able to show that the entire operation of a local is corrupt. But where you show that certain aspects of the operation of the international are corrupt, those are the only aspects in which you can legitimately ask for a trustee or a court liaison officer or a receiver. It was never our plan, for example, and it was never really under discussion to take over all of the aspects of the running of the International, including, let's say, collective bargaining and things like that.
But in the case of the Teamsters, are we not talking about so many major components of it that you relate to be corrupt, also to the conviction of this proven corrupt? But aren't we then, in fact, talking about de facto control?
If the United States government prevails, and if a trustee is appointed, the trustee will control very significant portions of the Teamsters Union. And from our point of view, those areas where we have proven corruption, and those areas which, if you remedy them, you can remove the influence of organized crime. It is not our goal to go beyond that. It would not be legitimate for us to go beyond that. If we were going beyond it, then all of the yelling and screaming and political reactions that we're taking over the union would be correct. That we would be doing it without a solid, responsible basis based on many, many convictions. I think what we're doing here is very prudent action. It's the kind of action that would be likely to achieve the result that we want, which is to move the mafia out of the Teamsters Union, but at the same time not destroy the union or be seen as some kind of an attack on the union movement, which it is not. I think above and beyond everything else, we want to make a very important point here, and that is that we will use all of these remedies, criminal and civil, to take back from organized crime the businesses, the unions, and the assets that they have acquired. That's been the theme throughout all of these cases, and that continues to be the theme in this case.
How do you think the rank and file Teamsters members are going to react to this?
I think you're going to have to ask them. I think that certainly there has been throughout, going back to Dave Beck and Jimmy Hoffa, dissident members of the union who have tried very, very hard to remove many of the criminals who are running these locals who have now been convicted, to remove the mafia members who have now been convicted. I have, and I know all of us, tremendous respect for their courage and bravery, because as you can see from the allegations in this complaint, at least 14 of them have been murdered. There was one situation in which they were beaten. Jackie Presser congratulated and encouraged the group that went and beat them. So it takes a lot of courage to stand up for these things within certain Teamster locals, but there still have been people who have had that courage. And we hope that this kind of lawsuit will support them and help them, and that over a period of time, after we get through the preliminary stages and the trial, we will be able to remove the mafia influence from the Teamsters Union.
Would you be able to then, in the broadest sense, tell us which activities are mob corrupted and which ones do not seem to run in the
Well, the major areas that we are not at this point, seeking to have the trustee control or the court liaison officer are the collective bargaining aspects of the International. Primarily, the concern of the court liaison officer and eventually the trustee will be with discipline, with dealing with the situations where there are either convictions or indictments or proof or even allegations that should be followed up of mafia or organized crime or other illegal activity on the part of Teamster officials. We have alleged, and we believe that we put forward a record in terms of convictions and everything else that demonstrates that the board has not acted at all to deal with this problem. The trustee and the court liaison officer would essentially take over those powers from the board, as well as create a process and procedure for an open, free, and fair election, so that the people that we seek to remove on a permanent basis from any involvement with the Teamster Union will be replaced by people who have no obligations to, and no involvement with, and no associations with the companies.
Mr. Giuliani, could you give us a list of what areas are in and what areas are out? I mean, you say areas where stuff is improving. Can you just sort of give us an abbreviated list of what areas you think the trustee would be appropriately taking over and what areas would be not?
I just did. The trustee will take over all of the powers of the board with regard to be involved in that sort of thing, to impose trusteeships on locals that are alleged to be or found to be involved with organized crime. He will take over all of those powers that the board presently has and has not exercised, that provide for discipline, that provide for that could have been used but were not, to eliminate the influence of organized crime and other illegal activities within the Teamsters Union. He will also preside over the creation of a new process to assure, over a period of time, free elections and fair elections so that everyone gets an equal chance in this situation to replace the people that are removed by virtue of the court action should that happen. Those will be his primary areas of responsibility. And as to the rest, at this point, it really depends on the phrase at the board, general executive board level. Some locals are already in trusteeship by virtue of other actions. How many locals? Two locals are present. Two locals in the metropolitan area are presently in trusteeship.
What about nationwide?
I believe that's right. I think there are two nationwide. They're both in the metropolitan area.
Which levels are those?
560 and 814.
Is there anything in this label suit that is totally unique from the 8 others that went before it under RICO?
Yes, this is
scope or where it's going.
Yes, all of the others with regard to unions dealt with locals, albeit in some cases very large locals, but locals. This is the first racketeering case brought against at the international level, and it is specifically directed to the international level.
Mr. Giuliani, this is clearly a major national case for you. Yet the Attorney General is not here. Did Mr. Meese have to sign off on this?
Mr. Meese is recused from this case.
Why?
I actually can't give you the precise reason for it, but this case has been under consideration and under investigation for over 2 years, I think, 2.5 years. And at the beginning of the investigation, Mr. Meese recused himself from it.
Has to do with Mr. President's support of the president.
I really think you have to ask the Attorney General that question.
He excused himself from involvement?
Very early on. It was way back when it was still being developed. The case was supervised for a very long period of time by Deputy Attorney General Burns, and he acted as the Attorney General, in essence, the acting Attorney General for a lot of the decisions and the formulation of the case.
In your opinion, was it better off that he excused himself from it?
Oh, he should ask the Attorney General his reasons for recusal, but I'm not going to answer that question.
Can you tell us what other
Yes, you want to describe
There are the two Teamsters locals described before, Local 560 in New Jersey and Local 814 in New York City. In addition, this office brought a civil RICO action against the District Council and Local 6A of the Cement and Concrete Workers Union here in New York City. And that District Council and that local are now under court-order trusteeship. In addition, there is a case out of Philadelphia involving a local roofers union in which a judge last month appointed a court liaison officer as a matter of preliminary civil RICO relief to oversee certain operations of that local roofers union.
I'd like to make one point about the powers of the trustee and the goal of the lawsuit. Someone back here asked me the question, and I'm not sure I answered it completely. The goal of the lawsuit is to remove the mafia from the Teamsters Union. We are asking for powers right now for the court liaison officer and the trustee that deal with those areas that we can establish involve mafia control and exercise of influence over the Teamsters. If, as the case develops, there are additional areas where the trustee would have to have power or the trustee would have to act, it is completely within the letter and spirit of this lawsuit that we would then ask for those powers as well. But at this point, we are basing our allegations on what we have proven, mostly in criminal cases, throughout, and those are the areas in which mafia influence has been exerted in the past. So I want to dispel any notion that this is limited in that sense.
Correct me if I'm wrong, was there not an federal investigation of Jackie Presser that was dropped not too long ago?
I think what you're confusing it with is there's an pending indictment of Jackie Presser, and I believe there was some determination in court that his case would be put off for some period of time, and the case against his co-defendant is going to go to trial. But it wasn't trial. Okay. I think it was put off for 6 months. The lawsuit relies on hundreds and hundreds of convictions and thousands of pages of testimony, of which Angelo Leonardo is a small part. The allegations with regard to the election, which would be, the question was asked, did the case change at all as a result of the action in the Genovese case? And it really has not changed. We are asking for the same thing there as we would have asked for, but now we're going to have to prove it under a civil burden of proof. And to a very large extent, as is outlined in the memorandum of law, the proof of those allegations, the last 2 elections were fixed, happens to be on tape and in tape recordings. Mr. Leonardo, Mr. Williams, others' testimony fills out those tape recorded comments, but to a very large extent, the proof of it exists in the words of Fat Tony Salerno and others. That was based on electronic surveillance done by the FBI. Decision, I do not know precisely when the decision was made by the Attorney General to recuse himself. I believe it was about 2 years ago. It was in that vicinity. And it was made, he made it on his own when the case was presented to him within the Justice Department. So that would be an unfair conclusion or characterization.
When did work on this case actually start?
You know, if you look at this case, you could say that work on this case started with the Kefauver Committee in the 1950s. Our work on the case, heavy, intensive work, and focus on putting together this case, probably started between 2.5 and 3 years ago. Meaning the work of the FBI, the U.S. Attorney's Office, the Department of Justice, focusing on a case such as this one, because it was an obvious, it seemed like an obvious use of the civil racketeering statute in very similar ways to the ways we've outlined using it in other situations.
And it was shortly after the major work on this case started that Mr. Meese took him out of the picture?
I don't. He may have done it even before that. I don't know. I think it was 2 to 3 years ago that in which he decided to recuse himself, and Deputy Attorney General Burns was designated as in essence, the highest authority in the Justice Department for deciding the various strategies in this case.
Well, you can't tell us what his reasons were?
I don't know his reasons. I can speculate on it, but I won't do that. And I think I've never seen an outline of reasons, so I don't know.
You say here that of the current board members, 7 have committed acts of racketeering, including fund payoffs and bribery, et cetera, et cetera. None of these charges have actually been brought criminally against any of these members. Is that correct?
In one case, Maurice Scher, who was on the board, he's been convicted of one of those racketeering acts. In other cases, we are going to prove those racketeering acts under the civil standard, which obviously we're entitled to do.
Are criminal charges likely to follow? Is there evidence contained within these allegations that is new that has not come out as a result of other criminal or civil cases?
I'm sure. Yes. The complaint is it's like a movie that goes back and goes forward. There are about half an act. About half of the complaint involves those things that have been proven in court before as part of the convictions of mafia members and Teamsters, and then a good deal that alleges other things that we intend to prove in various ways during this lawsuit. So it's a combination of both.
But obviously, if you had enough evidence to indict criminally on these...
No, that is not obvious and not correct. We made a choice in this case, as we did with the Fulton Fish Market, that it would be more that this is the time to go with a civil case, that we can achieve more with a civil case. There's a judgment that has to be made there as to, should you first develop your criminal case and then your civil case. We think there have been so many criminal cases in which Teamster officials and mafia people have been convicted that it's now time to move toward a civil case. And however that affects criminal cases, this is our first priority, because it permits us a form of relief, remedy, that would not be available in a criminal case. I mean, these convictions could go on and on forever, and the Teamsters could still continue to be dominated by the mafia if this civil action is not taken. Court liaison officer, trustee, as well as the injunctions that we're asking for, as well as however that develops for additional powers and remedies during the course of the lawsuit. And we hope and expect that it will move quickly, because we're certainly going to emphasize the need for moving quickly.
So is it fair to say that amongst the allegations are possible new criminal allegations that are being handled civilly at this point?
I think I have to say no comment. I don't know if I can characterize them as criminal allegations. Right now, they are allegations in a civil complaint. Some of them are already proven crimes. Others, you would have to draw an inference as to that.
You're saying this investigation actually goes back to the Keepover days. Why is it taking you so long, so many years, to finally zero in and actually come up with this case?
Well, it's taken very long for a lot of reasons. First of all, it took us about a decade to even admit that there was such a thing as organized crime. When it was first, when these allegations, which largely emerged then from the McClellan Committee hearings in the late 1950s, when these allegations first emerged, there was tremendous anger, tremendous disbelief, all sorts of cries that it was made up, that it was an attempt to destroy unions, to destroy the union movement, all that kind of things. That went on for some time. Finally, by the late 1960s, it was quite clear that we had a major national problem that had to be addressed, and Congress passed the racketeering statute. So the remedy wasn't even there until the late 1960s. And it's taken some time, I think, to pull it all together, and then to have the commitment and the will to do it, which may appear easier than it actually is, given all of the things that go on in developing a case like this, and all of the contending forces that are brought about.
Is it possible for you to have a corporation officer appointed by the Tuesday jury?
No, that's not.
The purpose of the hearing on Tuesday is for the parties to meet with the judge for the first time to present arguments on whether or not a court liaison officer should be appointed. So that will not happen before Tuesday.
What did happen on Tuesday? You expect the judge to make an immediate decision, or
we don't know when the judge will make his decision.
You've been through this before, though. I mean, when you go and ask for a court liaison officer,
You can't use one case as really as a precedent for another. We do not want to anticipate what the judge might do or when he might do it. He has set it down for a very, very quick initial hearing, and from our point of view, consistent with everybody getting a chance to put their case together in a responsible way, we want to move quickly.
Thank you.
There are copies of the temporary restraining order available in the court.